When Marcus Sterling pulled up to collect the overdue rent, the millionaire never expected to find that scene. A thin girl with tired eyes, hand-sewing, exhausted, trying to finish another dress to help her grandmother. What he didn't know was that this girl would change everything. Marcus stepped out of his luxury SUV without even closing the door properly. He was irritated. He'd had a day full of boring meetings, and on top of that, he had to go collect rent from a tenant who was already 2 months behind. He couldn't understand how people failed to fulfill something so basic. He walked down the long hallway of the old building, one they barely kept standing with a minimum maintenance. The smell of dampness filled his nostrils, and the sound of an old blender buzzed from some nearby apartment. When he reached number 2C, he took a deep breath and knocked hard. No response. He knocked again, harder. He heard a noise in the background, little footsteps, as if someone was approaching carefully. The door opened slowly, just a few centimeters. What he saw left him cold. A small girl, about 8 years old, with messy brown hair and eyes so big they almost popped out her thin face, looked up at him from below. Her lips were cracked and her clothes were stained with colored threads. She said nothing, just watched him as if expecting to scold her or push her away. Marcus crouched down, surprised. He asked if her grandmother was home. The girl shook her head no. She didn't say it, just denied it with her eyes wide open. He thought maybe the old woman had gone out for something, but then he noticed that behind the girl was one of those old sewing machines with a hand crank, and on top of the table were piles of fabric pieces, spools, needles. The girl had been sewing at that hour. Instead of being at school, instead of playing or watching cartoons, she was there with hands full of pinpricks and fingers marked by thread. "Are you alone here?" he asked in a voice that even sounded less serious to him. The girl hesitated, looked down, and opened the door a little more. Marcus didn't want to enter without permission, so he just took a step to peek better. The apartment was dark, curtains closed, stale air. A chair was wobbling in one corner. The refrigerator looked like it hadn't been cleaned in years, and the stove had a pot with something burned on top. What struck him most was a little bed in the living room, improvised with thin sheets and a torn blanket. Next to it were empty medicine boxes. At that moment, everything clicked for him. "Is your grandmother sick?" he asked without moving. The girl looked at him again, nodded, but didn't add anything. Marcus didn't know what to do. It wasn't the first time he'd seen poverty. Of course not. He'd grown up in a similar neighborhood, but it had been many years since he'd faced something so direct, so real. He took out his phone, pretended to check something, and asked the girl's grandmother's name. The girl said quietly, "Rose?" Then, as if she felt guilty for talking so much, she went back to focusing on the sewing she had in her hands. Marcus asked about the rent, though it no longer felt as important. The girl looked down and said her grandmother had left an envelope under the mattress. She ran inside without letting go of the needle. It took a few seconds, and she returned with a crumpled envelope. Marcus took it. It was almost empty. There were only a few small bills, barely $50. He said nothing. It wasn't time to discuss money. While the girl returned to her sewing machine, he stood at the door without moving. He couldn't just turn around and leave, but he didn't know how to help without it sounding like pity. The girl turned on the machine again, and the sound of the pedal filled the uncomfortable silence. Marcus didn't leave. He stayed watching how she moved her feet with force, though she was visibly tired. She was sleepy. You could see it in her face, in the way she nodded while sewing, but she continued as if she had no other choice. At that moment, something broke inside him. It wasn't compassion. It wasn't guilt. It was something else, a kind of rage that he didn't know where to direct. At the grandmother, at the system, at himself for not having done anything before. When he looked at her face again, he noticed she had a small drop of blood on her finger. She wiped it with her shirt without complaining and went back to continuing. "What's your name?" Marcus finally asked. She hesitated, but then said, "Emma," and then she went back to looking at her fabric. Marcus put his hand in his pants pocket and took out his wallet. He took out several bills and left them on the table without saying more. Emma didn't even look at them. She kept sewing. He left the apartment slowly without fully closing the door, as if that made the difference between leaving and staying a little. When he got to the SUV, he sat without starting it. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't clear about what to do. He only knew that girls shouldn't be alone, and that her story was just beginning. That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about what he had seen. A girl alone, sewing as if she had to save the world, in a place that barely held itself up. He hadn't even had the strength to demand the rent. He felt strange, as if what happened wasn't just sad, but also unfair. The next day, he woke up early, something he almost never did unless it was for work. Instead of going straight to his office, he detoured and stopped by a small store. He bought bread, cookies, and a few basic things. It wasn't much, but it was something. He didn't want to show up empty-handed. He felt he had to do something more than just leave money on the table. When he arrived again at 2C, he knocked softer. This time, Emma opened faster. Her hair was tied with an old rubber band, and she wore the same clothes as yesterday. Marcus smiled without really knowing how to start. He showed her the shopping bags. "I brought you some things," he said. Emma looked at him suspiciously. She didn't move. Marcus left the bags on the floor and crouched down to talk to her at her height. "Can I come in for a moment?" The girl didn't say yes, but stepped aside. Marcus entered carefully. The place looked the same, maybe a bit more organized, but still smelled of confinement and medicine. He left the things on the small table. Emma looked at them as if she didn't understand why someone would do that. Marcus tried not to make her uncomfortable. "Have you eaten?" She shrugged. "Some tortillas with salt," she said quietly. He took a deep breath, not knowing how to ask the right questions. He sat in the only chair that seemed stable. Emma stood with her hands behind her back. "Is your grandmother still in the hospital?" The girl hesitated, then looked down. "Yes, for 3 days now." "And who takes care of you?" "Nobody. I'm fine." Marcus felt something tighten in his chest. He couldn't imagine a child going through that without anyone doing anything. "And why were you sewing yesterday?" Emma looked up. For the first time, she seemed to want to talk. "I have to deliver some pillowcases. Mrs. Linda gives me some money if I deliver them well and fast." "And who is Mrs. Linda?" "She lives on the 3rd floor. She taught me to sew when Grandma got sick." "And what does your grandmother have?" Emma fell silent. She bit her lips, looked at the door as if thinking about running away. Marcus saw her struggle with her thoughts. She wanted to protect her secret, that was evident. But she also wanted someone to know what was happening. "Diabetes," she finally said very quietly. That word weighed like lead in the air. Marcus swallowed. He had suspected it, but hearing it from a girl's mouth felt different. "And the doctors, what do they say?" "That she needs medicine and insulin and maybe surgery." "And do you have insurance?" "No." Marcus ran his hand over his face. He wasn't a doctor or a lawyer or a social worker. He was a businessman, a guy who made deals from an air-conditioned office. But there he was in a room where light barely entered, listening to an 8-year-old girl explain that her grandmother was dying and she was alone, sewing to survive. "And why didn't you tell me that yesterday?" Emma shrugged. "I thought if you knew, you would take me away from here or take me to social services." That hit him directly. Marcus didn't know what to say. He hadn't thought about that, but now he understood everything. Emma wasn't afraid of strangers. She was afraid of the system, of adults who decide without asking, of being separated from her grandmother. "I'm not going to do that," he said firmly. "I'm not going to take you anywhere without your permission. I just want to help you." Emma looked at him for the first time with something that seemed like a bit of trust, as if she didn't quite believe it, but wanted to. "And who are you?" Marcus smiled slightly. "Let's say I'm the owner of the building, but today I didn't come as an owner. I came as Marcus. Nothing more." She nodded slowly, then went for a plastic cup served some water, and offered it to him. It was her way of saying it was okay for him to stay a while longer. While she showed him the pillowcases she was sewing, Marcus noticed something else. In a corner, there was a notebook with drawings of Emma and an old woman lying down with tubes and a sad smile. There was a heart between them, and below, in crooked letters, it said, "Everything will be okay, Grandma." Marcus felt he had to do something, whatever it was, but he could no longer stand by with his arms crossed. He knew that getting involved meant complicating his life, maybe even getting into legal trouble, but he could no longer ignore what he had seen. That girl was fighting a war alone, and he, for some reason he still didn't understand, could no longer look the other way. Marcus left the apartment with a heavy heart. In his head, he couldn't stop thinking about what he had just heard. An 8-year-old girl alone, sewing to gather a few dollars while her grandmother fought diabetes in some public hospital. He walked down the hallway without even watching his steps. Really, he didn't understand how they had gotten to that point. This wasn't his life. He was used to million-dollar deals, modern offices, meetings with people who always had answers for everything. But there, in that building full of humidity and peeling walls, there were no answers, only need, fatigue, and a girl who had already lived through more things than many adults. Before getting in his SUV, something occurred to him. He walked the back of the building to 3A, where Mrs. Chun lived. She was the typical neighbor who knew everything, the one who was always sitting by the window spying without hiding it. He knocked hard. The woman opened with surprised face, seeing him standing there. "Good morning, Mrs. Chun," said Marcus, trying to sound casual. "You're the owner, right?" "Yes, ma'am. I wanted to ask you something about the tenant in 2C. The woman opened the door wider and let him in without even asking what he wanted to know. Marcus entered the small apartment that smelled of fresh coffee and warm bread. "Look, young man," she began without him saying anything. "That poor girl, Rose, is going through a very difficult time. She's been months with that diabetes disease. Very serious. She's already losing weight and can't walk well. And the girl, Emma, poor little thing, that little creature lives alone since they hospitalized her grandmother the last time." Marcus listened in silence, with his eyes fixed on a table full of lottery papers, plastic cups, and Saint cards. "And she has no family?" "Not that I know of. Rose never talked about her past. But once when I helped her bring up some medicines, she told me she didn't want to bother anyone, that the only thing that mattered to her was her granddaughter. And look, that girl is an angel. She gets up early, goes to buy tortillas, cleans the house, washes clothes by hand, and also sews. Mrs. Linda from right here taught her. She comes from time to time to check her sewing, but most of the time the girl is alone. Sometimes I hear her cry at night, but I don't go because what can an old woman like me do?" Marcus felt a knot in his throat. The image of Emma sewing, with pricked fingers and eyes about to close from sleep, came to his mind again. "And the hospital where Mrs. Rose is. Do you know which one?" "Yes, of course. She's at the General Hospital, in the downtown area, in the diabetes ward. I went once to take her a blanket, because the nights there are freezing. She has no visitors. Nobody goes, only the girl when she can. But you see, she's very small." Marcus got up with clenched hands, thanked Mrs. Chun, and left the apartment quickly. He couldn't leave this like this. He got in his SUV, called his driver to cover for him in an important meeting, and drove straight to the hospital. On the way, he bought some fruit juice and a thick blanket. He felt it was the minimum. He didn't even know if they would let him in, but he needed to see Rose with his own eyes. When he arrived at the hospital, the environment hit him head-on. People sleeping in chairs, others waiting on the floor, nurses running from one side to another. At reception, he asked for Rose, and they told him she was on the 3rd floor, bed 12. He went up with firm steps, though inside he felt out of place. He had never stepped foot in a public hospital before. In bed 12, he found a thin woman with very pale skin and closed eyes. She wore a borrowed gown, and had a serum bottle hanging beside her. At the headboard, a sheet said Rose Martinez. It was her. She looked younger than he had imagined, maybe about 60 years old, but the wear on her face made her look older. She had gray hair, very thin, as if it had started falling out. She had her hands on her chest, motionless. A nurse approached him. "Are you family?" Marcus hesitated for a second. "Friend from the building." The nurse looked at him strangely, but said nothing. She only recommended he not stay too long. Marcus sat beside her and left the bag with fruit on the metal table. "Hello, Rose," he said quietly. "I don't know if you remember me. I'm the owner of the place where you live. Well, lived, because now you're here. I just came to see how you were, and to tell you that your granddaughter is a warrior, a brave girl." Rose didn't respond, but seemed to move her lips a little. Marcus stayed a while longer in silence, observing, feeling that strange mixture of guilt, anger, and desire to do something that burned inside him. When he left the hospital, the world seemed grayer to him. She was no longer just a tenant. She was no longer just a girl. Now they were people with history, with real pain, people the system left forgotten while others pretended not to see. That night, Marcus not only decided he was going to help them, he decided he wouldn't do it from afar, with checks or favors. He would do it for real, even if it meant getting into trouble, even if it meant facing people from his own team, because what he'd just seen he couldn't forget. If you're following this story and want to know what happens next, don't forget to subscribe to stay updated with every detail. Marcus woke up that Saturday earlier than usual, but not because he had a meeting or appointment. He woke up with an idea spinning in his head since the night before. He had been staring at his bedroom ceiling for hours, thinking about Rose, about Emma, about that sad apartment where a girl was fighting alone for her grandmother. He wasn't a hero, nor did he pretend to be, but he also didn't want to sit with his arms crossed. He couldn't. He knew that if he appeared at that place again with things or with more questions, Emma was going to close up. She was very smart. He had already noticed that. That's why he decided to do something without them knowing it was him. No speeches or favors in return, just help. He went to the supermarket early. He bought basic groceries: rice, beans, milk, cookies, soap, toilet paper, some fruit, sliced bread, tuna can, cereal, candy, and a small bottle of strawberry-scented shampoo for girls. He also put in a box of bandages, cotton, and Band-Aids in case Emma kept sewing and kept pricking her fingers. In the checkout line, he felt people looking at him strangely, as if he were a single father, but he didn't care. He paid and left there with several large bags. Before arriving at the building, he detoured to a pharmacy and bought an envelope with cash. Nothing exaggerated, but enough for a few days. He put it in a separate bag without any name. Then he drove to the building and parked far away so they wouldn't see his SUV. He walked carrying the bags to the entrance. He went up to the second floor carefully, listening if anyone was coming. He didn't want to run into anyone. In front of the door to see, he left the bags one by one. Then he took out the envelope and hid it between the bag of bread, well arranged so they would find it by accident. Before leaving, he knocked on the door twice quickly and ran down the stairs without looking back. He heard someone opening, but didn't turn around. He didn't want to see the reaction, not out of ego or embarrassment. He just felt that if the girl knew it was him, she wouldn't accept it so easily. That afternoon, he returned to his routine, went to the office, answered calls, checked some emails, but deep down he wasn't concentrated. He felt less weight on his back, but also a need to know if what he had done had really helped. He thought about sending someone a check, but didn't want to involve anyone else. It was his business, period. The next day he returned to the building, but without bags or pretext. He went up to the second floor and knocked on the door as if nothing had happened. Emma opened. She was different. Her hair was more combed, a little blouse that seemed freshly washed, and a less tired face. She still had sad eyes, but you could tell she had slept better. "Hello, Emma," he said with a smile. "Everything okay?" She nodded, looking inside as if doubting whether to let him pass. Marcus didn't force anything. He just came to say hello. "I wanted to know how your grandmother was doing. The same, she told me. The lady from the hospital said she's stable. And how are you? Emma made a strange gesture between a smile and a grimace. Then she opened the door more and let him in. Marcus noticed the place smelled different. There was an aroma of hot beans and something sweet. The table was a bit more organized, and there wasn't so much clothes thrown around. "Did you eat well today?" he asked. "Yes." Some bags appeared outside the door. "I think it was the neighbors, or maybe Mrs. Linda." "Oh, how nice of them," said Marcus, pretending surprise. Emma grabbed a vanilla cookie from a plate and offered him one. He accepted it. He sat in his usual chair while she settled in the corner with a cushion and a folded blanket beside her on the table. The sewing machine was covered with a clean cloth. "And are you going to keep sewing?" "Yes, but less. Now I have enough to pay Mrs. Linda, and she told me she can help me finish some pillowcases I owe." "And what are you going to do with the money?" "I'm going to save it. For my grandma's medicines." Marcus kept looking at her. He couldn't believe someone so little thought like that. Not even adults were so responsible. Emma ate slowly, as if each cookie were a prize. Then she got up and went to a box. She took out something and gave it to Marcus. "I made this yesterday," she said. It was a small embroidery with the letters MS in red thread, surrounded by a little heart. Marcus felt his chest fill with emotion, but said nothing, just carefully put away. "Thank you, Emma. I'm going to take it to work, so I don't forget what matters." She didn't respond, just smiled slightly. Before leaving, Marcus promised he would return soon. He didn't say when or with what intention, just let it out, like someone leaving the door ajar for whatever comes next. Going down the stairs, he ran into Michelle, his property manager, for the first time. She was coming with a folder in her hand. She wore heels, dark glasses, and an unfriendly face. "What are you doing here, boss?" she asked directly. "Reviewing a personal matter. Does it have anything to do with the lady in 2C? "Why do you ask?" Michelle pursed her lips. "Because that tenant is already 2 months behind on payment. And according to the rules you yourself signed, we should proceed with eviction this week." Marcus didn't respond immediately. He looked at her seriously. That conversation was just beginning. But in his head, he was already clear that nobody was going to take Emma out of there. Not while he could prevent it. Michelle wasn't stupid. As soon as she saw Marcus's face when he left the building that day, she knew something strange was happening. He didn't usually get involved with tenants. He always left that kind of thing in her hands, as it should be. But now he was there coming out of the second floor with an embroidered bag in his hand, and that face like he was hiding something. And if there was something Michelle hated, it was not being told everything, especially when it came to business. "What personal matter could you have with that woman, Marcus?" she asked while catching up with him on the stairs. "It's none of your business," he replied without stopping. "Of course it is," she said, raising her tone. "Mrs. Martinez hasn't paid for months. That debt is registered, and according to the contract, we should already be filing the eviction order. I don't understand why we keep postponing this." Marcus stopped dead and looked at her. "Because I don't want to, Michelle. That should be enough." "No," she replied coldly. "Not when we're talking about properties that are part of the group. This is no longer just your decision. There are rules, protocols, and you hired me to make sure they're followed. Or did you already forget?" Marcus looked down, contained his anger, and continued walking toward the street without saying more. He knew Michelle was right legally, but not humanly, and that bothered him. He knew her well. She was brilliant at handling numbers, contracts, and paperwork, but she was also harsh, meticulous, incapable of seeing beyond what was written in black and white. Everything was profit or loss, never people. Michelle followed him to the SUV. "I'm not going to stop the process just because you got attached to a poor girl. This isn't a shelter, it's a business. And if you don't do something, I'm going to do it. I already have the notice ready. I'm just waiting for your signature." Marcus looked at her from the driver's seat. He was furious, but couldn't explode there. The SUV started and left without saying anything more. Michelle stood on the sidewalk, arms crossed, with the folder under her arm and lips pressed. Something didn't add up for her, and when something didn't add up, she investigated to the bottom. That same afternoon, Michelle got into Property System, reviewed contracts, histories, rent correspondence. She saw that Marcus had made several deposits from his personal account to the general hospital account. There were also small transfers to a local pharmacy. Everything indicated he was covering expenses without notifying anyone. Not the accountant, not the majority partner, not the trust, nothing. And that's when her expression changed. Michelle had no emotional interest in the situation. She didn't care about the girl or the illness or the poverty. What she saw was something else, an opportunity. If Marcus was moving money without declaring it, that could become a legal problem. And a legal problem could be used to get him out of the way, to take control. It wasn't the first time she thought about it. Marcus had talent, yes, but he was also impulsive, trusting, sentimental. And those things in big business were weaknesses. The next day, Michelle went to the building early. She didn't greet anyone, went straight to the second floor with her folder under her arm. She knocked hard on the door of 2C. Emma opened. She didn't know her. "Is your grandmother here?" she asked with a dry tone. "No, she's in the hospital." "And who are you?" "Emma." Michelle looked at her with a mixture of discomfort and judgment. She wasn't used to dealing with children, especially children who looked her straight in the face. "Tell your grandmother she has 3 days to vacate this apartment." "I'm sorry, but there are no exceptions." "My grandma is sick," said Emma without moving. "I know, and I'm very sorry you had to go through this, but I have no other option. These are the building owner's rules." Emma didn't respond, just closed the door slowly. She didn't cry, didn't ask anything, and that somehow bothered Michelle more than she expected. When leaving the building, she met Mrs. Chun on the stairs. The neighbor looked her up and down with distrust. "Who are you?" she asked. "The administrator." "And excuse me, I'm in a hurry." "Ah, I see. You were the one who left the eviction paper." Michelle looked at her, already annoyed. "It's what corresponds, nothing personal." "Sure, they always say that," said Mrs. Chun with sarcasm. "But when the girl ends up on the street, are you going to come explain to her why? Or are you just going to sign another paper?" Michelle didn't respond, went down the steps quickly, and left without looking back. That afternoon, Emma went to hospital, walked there with juice in her backpack and the eviction notice folded in 4. She showed it to her grandmother without saying anything. Rose read it and closed her eyes. She didn't have strength to talk. She just stretched her hand and caressed her hair. "Don't worry, my love. We're going to get through this." But her voice sounded weaker and weaker. Meanwhile, Marcus received a call from a private number. When he answered, he heard Michelle's firm voice. "You have 24 hours to sign the eviction notice. If you don't do it, I'm going to send a complete file to the partner committee, including the bank movements you made. You decide." Marcus hung up without saying a word. His jaw was trembling with rage. But in his head, a plan was already forming. Marcus was sitting in his office looking at the computer screen without really seeing anything. He had emails, reports, presentations open, but he wasn't reading them. Everything passed him by. The only thing on his mind was Michelle's call, the threat, the warning, her tone. He wasn't afraid. That wasn't it. It was the rage of knowing that someone could be so cold as to use a grandmother's illness and a girl's loneliness as if they were part of a business plan. He turned off the screen, got up without telling anyone anything, and left. Nobody stopped him. Marcus had always been one of those who made decisions without giving explanations. He arrived at the building almost at nightfall. The sun was going down, and the hallway on the second floor was in shadows. He knocked softly. Emma opened. She had the same clothes from last week, but cleaner. There was something different in her face, as if she had already given up. She said nothing, just looked at him, and he inside felt like garbage. He entered without speaking, just making a gesture. Emma sat at the table with a folded sheet in front of her. It was the eviction notice. "Michelle brought you this?" Marcus asked, though he already knew the answer. Emma nodded without looking at him. "And what do you think you'll do?" "I don't know," she said quietly. "I can't pay. I have nowhere to go. But if I leave, how will my grandma know where I am?" Marcus closed his eyes for a second. It hurt more than any blow. Emma wasn't worried about herself. She was thinking about her grandmother. That girl wasn't asking for anything for herself. She just wanted her grandmother to know she was okay. "You're not going anywhere," he said firmly. "I'm not going to let that happen. I promise." Emma looked at him suspiciously. "But you're not the owner?" "Yes, I am." "Then why are they going to kick us out?" Marcus gritted his teeth. "Because there are people who only see numbers, but I see people. And you're not a debt. You're a girl who's doing more than any adult would do." She didn't answer, but for the first time in days, her shoulders relaxed as if her body alone let go some tension. "Can I go to the hospital tomorrow?" she asked. "Of course you can. In fact, I'm going to take you." Emma's eyes opened in surprise. "You?" "Yes. Tomorrow at 8 o'clock sharp. With your permission." "Of course." She nodded with a small movement. Then she went to the room and returned with a small cloth bag with fruit inside. "This is for you. It's the last apple, but it's good. I saved it because I thought maybe there wouldn't be anything tomorrow." Marcus swallowed, took the apple carefully, as if it were something valuable. And at that moment, without needing to say it, something was sealed between them, an agreement that didn't need papers or signatures. After leaving her, he went down the stairs slowly. He ran into Mrs. Chun, who was sweeping the entrance with an old broom. She looked at him as if she already knew everything. "What are you going to do, Mr. Marcus?" she asked without beating around the bush. "Whatever needs to be done, but do it quickly because the girl can't take another blow and Mrs. Rose doesn't have much time left." Marcus looked her straight in the eyes. "I'm not going to leave them alone." Mrs. Chin nodded. "Then you better hurry, because the one in the suit and heels is already saying that if the order doesn't come out this week, she's going to move everything with the lawyers herself. And that one doesn't stop for anything." Marcus returned to his SUV without responding. While driving, he thought about what he had left to do. It was no longer a matter of giving money or doing a good deed. It was something else. It was something personal. Something that came from his stomach. Maybe because in Emma he saw something that reminded him of his own past. Or maybe because he finally understood that having power served for something more than growing companies. The next day he arrived at the building at 7:30. Emma was already waiting for him, sitting on the stairs with a small backpack. She looked nervous, but excited. They got in the SUV and went straight to the hospital. On the way, they hardly spoke. Only at the end, before getting out, Emma said something. "Do you think my grandma already knows I want to stay with her?" Marcus looked at her and responded without thinking. "Yes, and she also knows she has a granddaughter who's worth gold." They entered the hospital together. Rose was still in bed, paler, more fragile. Emma approached, hugged her carefully, and stayed there without letting go. Marcus watched from the door. He didn't need to get involved, just be there present, like a good shadow that doesn't get in the way, but doesn't leave. Meanwhile, Michelle was sending messages, calling lawyers, gathering papers. She wasn't going to lose, she didn't accept it, and if Marcus didn't sign that order, she was going to sink him from another angle. She already had the documents ready, the evidence of unauthorized movements. It was just a matter of time. But Marcus also had something Michelle didn't. People on his side, people who weren't in contracts or files, but who counted. And sooner than she thought, that difference was going to matter. Things had been a little calmer the last few days. Marcus kept helping quietly. He picked up Emma every other morning to take her to the hospital to see her grandmother. He made sure she had food at home and even got Mrs. Linda to come up for an hour in the afternoons to check that she didn't lack anything. Emma no longer looked at him with distrust. She was beginning to see him as someone who didn't just say things, but fulfilled them. One afternoon, while they were sitting in the small park near the hospital, Emma was playing with a fallen leaf, folding it as if it were a figure. Marcus was checking his phone, though his head wasn't on that. The girl interrupted him without looking up. "What if my grandma doesn't wake up anymore?" Marcus took a while to respond. "Why do you ask that?" "Because yesterday the nurse told me she was very tired, more than before, that sometimes bodies give up." Marcus put his phone aside, got a little closer. "And what do you think? That if she goes away, I'll be alone? And that scares me." He found no words to calm her, just let her talk. Sometimes that was the best thing. That same night, he received a call from the hospital. It was the nurse in charge of the shift. Her voice sounded different, rushed, with that seriousness that feels like a punch in the stomach. "Mr. Marcus, sorry to bother you at this hour. It's about Mrs. Rose. She had a severe relapse. She went into a state of instability, and they're moving her to intensive care. Could you come?" He didn't think twice. He changed quickly, grabbed his keys, and went straight to the hospital. When he arrived, Emma was already in the waiting room, hugging a pillow. She had arrived alone on public transport with her backpack hanging from her shoulder. Her eyes were teary, but she wasn't crying. It was that kind of sadness that no longer comes out with tears. It just stays inside burning. "How long have you been here?" Marcus asked. "Since 7. The nurse called me. She said my grandma wasn't responding anymore." Marcus sat next to her. He said nothing, just hugged her with one arm. Emma let him. She didn't curl up, didn't break down, but didn't pull away either. She just stayed there firm, looking ahead. After a while, a doctor came out. She explained that Rose had entered an advanced stage, that her body was no longer responding well to treatment, that they were doing everything possible, but couldn't promise anything. She used words like low resistance, internal infection, and pulmonary complication. Marcus only looked at Emma. She understood everything. Even though she said nothing, she understood it. "Can I see her?" the girl asked. "Yes, but only for a little while," said the doctor. They took her down a long hallway full of tubes, machines, tired people, and cold lights. Rose was lying with yellower skin than ever, dry lips and closed eyes. She had many cables connected. Emma approached slowly, climbed on a chair, and took her hand. She said nothing, just looked at her. Marcus stayed at the door without moving, watching. He didn't know what to do. It was a situation that neither all his money nor his contacts could fix. It was something that escaped his hands. After a few minutes, Emma came out. She wasn't crying, but she was trembling. "Can we stay here tonight?" she asked. "Yes, of course we can. We're not leaving," Marcus replied without hesitation. He asked for a chair and arranged it so the girl could lie down a bit. He stayed awake. He spent the early morning watching nurses come and go, hearing the sound of monitors and the constant dripping of serum. At one point, Emma fell asleep with her head on his arm. Marcus adjusted her carefully and covered her feet with his jacket. At dawn, another doctor entered. She said Rose was still the same, neither better nor worse, but that the next 24 hours were crucial. If her body didn't react, she probably wouldn't make it out of there. Marcus got up and went a hallway. He called someone, a private doctor. He explained the situation. He asked him to go see Rose, even if it was just to confirm the diagnosis. He didn't completely trust that hospital, not because they were bad, but because they lacked things. Sometimes the difference between living or dying was a bag of blood, an antibiotic, or a quick decision. The doctor arrived in the afternoon, examined Rose, spoke with the hospital doctors, explained to Marcus that the situation was serious, but not irreversible. There was an experimental treatment being applied at another hospital, but it was expensive and complicated. Also, they needed to move her soon. Hours counted. Marcus didn't hesitate. "Do it. I'll cover everything." The doctor looked at him as if doubting. "Are you sure?" "More than ever." While they did the paperwork for the transfer, Emma sat next to him. And if it can't be done, it will be possible. And if not, then I'm going to stay with you until the end, whatever happens. Emma said nothing, just took his hand. For the first time, she hugged him. It wasn't a long or strong hug, but it was sincere, like those hugs you get when you have no words left and can only trust. That night, while they transferred Rose in an ambulance, Marcus went in the back with Emma sitting beside him. The new hospital was half an hour away. The silence inside the ambulance was heavy but firm, as if everyone going there knew they were fighting for something worth it. Rose's transfer was complicated. The ambulance arrived at the private hospital just as the sky was starting to cloud over. It looked like it was going to rain. Emma clung to Marcus's hand tightly, as if everything depended on that. They took her down carefully, straight to the intensive care unit. The doctor started working without wasting time. Marcus had signed all the papers, authorized treatments, and handed over his card without even looking at the amount. It didn't matter. What he wanted was to save that woman. Not for him, but for that girl who had already changed his life. But while all that was happening, somewhere else in the city, someone else was moving with the same speed, but with very different intentions. Michelle was sitting in her office in front of her computer, reviewing documents. Her eyes were fixed on a file she had been preparing for weeks. The eviction of apartment 2C was already authorized by a judge. She had gotten it without telling Marcus, without anyone knowing. She had contacts, lawyers, a notification firm that had already done that type of work. She knew how to move, and she did. That same Friday, right at noon, 2 people dressed in civilian clothes arrived at the building with papers in hand. They went up to the second floor, knocked on the door at 2C, but nobody answered. Emma wasn't there, Rose wasn't either, nobody. Only Mrs. Chun, who had already realized everything, came running down the stairs when she saw them. "What are you doing?" she asked with a frown. "We came to execute an eviction order." "What are you talking about?" "The lady is in the hospital. The girl too. That doesn't concern us, ma'am. We only comply with what's signed." They entered the apartment without breaking anything, but without asking permission. They carried a key that someone had given them. Inside, there wasn't much of value, but there were things that hurt to see. Emma's drawing stuck on the wall, her homework notebook, a bag with colored threads, a stuffed animal missing an eye. All of that was packed in boxes with labels that said personal objects. Mrs. Chin watched them from the door with rage in her eyes. She wanted to do something, but couldn't. She called Marcus, but he didn't answer. He was in the hospital waiting room, waiting for news about Rose. That same day, Michelle went to the building in person, went up to the second floor, watched as the workers took the boxes down to truck, and checked that everything was in order. "Let me know when you're done. I don't want mistakes." "And what do we do with what's left?" "Throw it away. And if the girl comes back?" Michelle hesitated for half a second. "Not my problem." And she left. Hours later, Emma and Marcus were returning to the building. Rose was stable, but not out of danger. They had to wait. Marcus thought they could go rest a bit, eat something, maybe. He didn't imagine what he was going to find. When they entered, Marcus noticed that Mrs. Chung was waiting for him at the entrance with a worried face. She didn't need to say anything, just took his arm and led him to the second floor. Emma was going up quickly, not imagining anything strange, but when she reached her door, she stood still. Number 2C had a white sheet stuck with tape. It said, "Eviction executed, do not force entry." "What is this?" Emma asked with her voice trembling. Marcus ran to the door, tried to open it, but it was already sealed. He ran downstairs, spoke with the building manager. The guy only told him, "They came today with papers. They said it was by court order." I didn't know what to do. Marcus couldn't believe it. He looked for his phone. He saw 15 missed calls, all from Mrs. Chun. There was also a message. "They took her away, Marcus. They took her away. Michelle ordered everything removed. I tried to stop them. They didn't listen to me." Emma was still standing in front of the door, without moving. "Where are my things?" she asked. "Calm down. We're going to fix this," said Marcus, trying to keep calm. "They kicked us out." "Yes, but it wasn't my decision. I swear to you." "Was it that lady?" she asked with a low voice. Marcus didn't respond. He didn't want the girl to feel hate, but he could no longer hide it. "Yes, it was her." Emma looked down, then turned around and went down the stairs without saying anything. Marcus followed her, spoke to her, but she didn't answer. Marcus hugged her tightly. "Emma, you're not alone." "Not anymore, that's clear." She looked at him with eyes full of water, but without crying. "I don't want to die without knowing where I am. It won't happen. Today we're going back to the hospital, and this time you're going to stay close like you want. No more moving, no more hiding." That same morning, Marcus moved with everything. He spoke with his trusted lawyer, explained what Michelle had done. He asked for advice to stop any eviction process while he resolved the legal matter. He also asked him to review all the documents signed by her in his name. He suspected there were more hidden things. Then he went to the private hospital, spoke with the administration, and requested a small room for Emma. It didn't matter if it was just a little bed next to the staff rest area. He wanted her to be there close to Rose. In the afternoon, the girl went back to see her grandmother, this time calmer. She spoke to her quietly. She told her she was no longer afraid, that she already knew someone was there to take care of her. Rose didn't respond, but a tear escaped from the corner of her eye. Marcus stood, watching that scene with a knot in his throat. That night, while Emma finally slept on a sofa bed they improvised for her, Marcus received an email from his lawyer. Michelle had not only executed the eviction without notice, she had also processed a partial power document to make legal decisions on behalf of the company. She had forged his signature. Michelle wasn't just a threat. She was playing dirty, and the war was just beginning. The first time Emma entered the new place where she would live, she stood at the door without saying anything. It wasn't an old apartment or an adapted warehouse. It was a small house, but well cared for in a quiet area. It had a little garden in front, 2 rooms, and a kitchen with a modern stove. Marcus hadn't told her much, just said, "Let's go to a place where you can be safe." And there they were. She didn't move. She had her backpack hanging from one shoulder and her eyes wide open. "Are we going to live here?" she asked. "Yes. This is your home from now on." "And are you going to live here too?" "No, but I'm going to come every day or whenever you want." Emma walked slowly to the center of the living room. She touched a chair, then the table, then looked out the window. It was hard for her to believe it. In the kitchen there was food, bottled water, new dishes. In one of the rooms, a bed with clean sheets, a nightstand lamp, and even a little box of crayons on the bureau. Everything was ready for her. "I can stay alone if you want, but I can also stay for a while," Marcus replied. "I want to try," said the girl. "I want to see how it feels to be at peace." And she said it so seriously, with such a sincere voice, that Marcus felt his chest tighten. He let Emma explore the house at her pace. Meanwhile, outside he spoke with Sarah, a nurse he had hired on direct recommendation from the doctor treating Rose. She would be available 24 hours, both to help with the girl and to go to the hospital if necessary. Marcus didn't want to leave anything to chance. Sarah entered with a grocery bag and a kind smile. She wasn't the typical nurse in a white uniform with a boss face. She was warm, simple, the type who listens before speaking. Emma looked at her sideways, but said nothing. Marcus introduced Sarah to her as a friend who was going to stop by from time to time. He didn't want the girl to feel like she was being watched. That night was different. Emma slept with the door open, but not because she was afraid. She wanted to hear if someone arrived. Marcus, from the living room, listened to how she breathed evenly, calmly. She didn't move all through the early morning. At 6 a.m, she was already awake, sitting in the kitchen with a cup of hot milk and an open notebook. "I'm writing to my grandma," she told him when Marcus approached. "I want her to know we're okay." Can I help you with something? Can you take me to the hospital later? Of course, whenever you say. And that's what they did. That morning, Marcus drove to the hospital with Emma, beside him, listening to soft music. On the way, she talked to him about school, about a teacher who had given her a nice pencil, about how she missed sewing, but no longer felt so much pressure to do it. There was a different calm in her voice. When they arrived, Rose was awake, but weak. She could barely speak. Emma approached and showed her the letter she had written. It was simple, with drawings of her, of Marcus, of a new house, and a phrase written in large letters. "Everything is better, Grandma." Rose smiled. It was a barely visible smile, but real. "Thank you," she said with effort. Marcus stayed behind without bothering. He didn't need to hear what they were saying. Just seeing them made his soul feel right. That week, many things happened. Emma started eating better, sleeping more peacefully. Sarah took her to register at the nearest school. They didn't give her many problems. A teacher understood the situation and accepted her immediately. It was a simple neighborhood school, but with good people. Emma didn't object, just asked for a new notebook and a pencil and eraser. Marcus bought her a complete backpack, and she filled it carefully, as if it were a treasure. Rose, for her part, was responding little by little to the treatment. It wasn't a miraculous improvement, but you could tell that the hospital changed, rest, and new medicines were working. Sometimes she opened her eyes, asked about Emma, and even asked for small things. Soup, juice, a blanket with flowers. Marcus took care of everything. One afternoon, the hospital doctor sat with him and told him, "Her situation is still delicate, but she's fighting, and having her granddaughter close keeps her awake. Do you think she can recover? With what we're doing, she has a real chance. It's not certain, but it's possible." And for Marcus, that was already something enormous, an opportunity, a second chance. Despite everything, he didn't let his guard down. He knew Michelle wasn't going to give up so easily. Since the last email from his lawyer, there had been no signs of her, but that didn't calm him. On the contrary, he knew her style. When she went silent, it was because she was planning something big. That's why he started moving his own pieces. He gathered documents, recovered email backups, asked his accountant for a report of every move that Michelle had made in recent weeks. He didn't want to act without evidence. If he was going to defend Emma and Rose, he was going to do it with everything. Inside, he was no longer doing it just for them. He felt something had ignited in him, as if the story was also his way of changing what was wrong, of doing something that was truly worth it. One night, while they were returned from the hospital, Emma looked at him suddenly without him expecting it. "Why do you do all this for us?" Marcus stopped at a traffic light. He looked at her sideways. "Because someone had to do it." "But why you?" "Because I have what it takes, and because you deserve it." Emma said nothing more, just rested her head against the window. And although she didn't say it with words, at that moment she understood that she finally had something that can't be bought or asked for. Someone who doesn't leave. If you've made it this far and want to keep following stories that matter, don't forget to subscribe to the channel.